So what if early life wasn't just some, lucky chemical accident in a warm pond? What if, quite literally, rocks computed life?
Yeah, that is the exact paradigm shift we are getting into today. It completely rewrites the story.
Welcome to today's deep dive. We are stepping completely outside the traditional Darwinian narrative for you today. Because, well, when we normally picture the origin of life, we all default to that classic primordial soup.
Right. The lightning strike hitting the muddy puddle.
Exactly. Chemicals bumping into each other in this frantic, random way. And against staggering astronomical odds, a single-celled organism just kind of swims away. I mean, it's a story of ultimate lottery ticket luck, but mathematically relying on pure chance to organize chaotic matter like that, it has always felt deeply unsatisfying.
Well, because it leaves way too much to a miraculous roll of the dice. I mean, the physics of thermodynamics just do not favor order spontaneously erupting from chaos without incredibly strict constraints.
Which brings us to the actual stack of sources we are unpacking today. We've got these incredibly dense, groundbreaking physics and theoretical biology papers.
Yes, specifically exploring the Gibsonian formalism of abiogenesis, recursive token lattice synthesis, and W-sheaf theory.
Which I know it sounds like a wall of math, but our mission today is to translate these intense models into a clear story. Because the hook here is just mind-bending. The papers argue that life is not chemistry that just got lucky.
No, not at all. What's fascinating here is that they define life as a contextual token realizability.
Okay, let's break that down.
Right. So in plain terms, life emerges as a lawful, highly constrained, mathematically predictable algorithm, and it's executing on a physical stone hard drive. We are talking about strict computation running on the surface of a mineral lattice.
Okay, so to understand how a literal rock can compute something as complex as life, we have to totally throw out the idea of molecules floating freely and bumping together. We need to look at the strict rules of this mineral hardware, which the papers call Recursive Token Lattice Synthesis, or RTLS.
Yeah, RTLS. So picture the environment first. We aren't in a placid, warm pond. We are deep underwater at a hydrothermal vent. Towering chimneys of porous rock, scalding heat, extreme chemical gradients.
Not exactly a calm place to build a fragile cell.
Exactly. But those porous rocks are the crucial hardware. These minerals form intricate, microscopic crystal lattices. And in the RTLS model, this crystal network acts as a physical Turing machine.
But obviously not processing digital ones and zeros, right?
No, instead of digital data on a silicon chip, the rock processes physical chemical tokens. The local prebiotic environment is broken down into 5 distinct tokens. You have chemical occupancy, energetic state, boundary state, informational state, and the mineral catalytic microstate.
So it's not just a matter of having the right carbon atoms present. The system demands this full spatial and energetic checklist. Like, you need the atom, yes, but you also need the local temperature to be exactly right. You need physical clearance on the crystal to actually place the molecule.
And you need the mineral itself to be in a state where it can catalyze a reaction, which introduces the absolute bedrock of this entire framework. It's called the full complement rule.
The full complement rule.
Okay, yeah. In a primordial soup, you just assume reactions happen if things smash together hard enough. But in this discrete lattice framework, a reaction only advances when local token conditions perfectly close. It acts as a strict physical gate.
Meaning everything has to align perfectly.
Right. You must have monomer availability, energy, steric or spatial compatibility, and boundary compatibility all aligned on that specific microscopic patch of stone at the exact same moment.
You know, it sounds exactly like complex crafting mechanics in a survival video game or a board game.
Oh, that's a good way to look at it. How so?
Well, you can't just throw raw materials at a wall and hope a complex item pops out. You can't craft the protocell item until your inventory slots have the exact required tokens. You need one energy token, one boundary token, the wood, the iron, the workbench, all in your inventory simultaneously.
Exactly. And if
Yeah.
you try to assemble the piece and the room is 5 degrees too cold, or the workbench is occupied,
The physical laws of the game just reject the attempt. The pieces do not snap together.
the energy dissipates, the components drift apart, and the system just waits. It is pure conditional logic. If the full complement is met, the system updates to the next layer of complexity. If even a single token is missing, it resets.
Which is profound because, thinking about you listening to this right now, it fundamentally removes the mystical lottery ticket luck from the origin of life. It makes life a lawful, predictable advancement. If the tokens are present, life must compute forward.
It's inevitable.
Right. But, okay, this raises a massive logistical problem for me. If life is this strict computation advancing step by step through these microscopic mineral gates, where does the code live? I mean, we are talking about a time millions of years before DNA or RNA even existed.
Yeah.
How do you have heredity without genes?
That is the big question. So we have to look at the pregenetic milestone ladder. Before anything resembles modern, free-floating reproduction, there is a stage called the persistence complement.
Persistence complement. So they aren't copying themselves yet.
No, molecules don't need to replicate perfectly right away. Their first job is simply to survive the chaotic currents of the hydrothermal vent. So they lock on to a microscopic defect in the crystal lattice, absorb geothermal energy, and hold their ground. They literally just form and wait.
Wait, hold on. If they are just sitting there locked to a rock like a stubborn barnacle holding on for dear life, how does life actually spread or grow? I mean, a rock with some chemicals glued to it doesn't sound alive. Doesn't life require copying?
Well, we are biased by modern biology, you know. We look for spherical cells splitting down the middle and floating away. But in this pregenetic regime, reproduction doesn't happen by budding off into the water. It happens through two-dimensional mineral lattice reproduction.
Two-dimensional reproduction.
Yeah. Imagine these persistent molecules have formed a flat, 2D sheet across a single layer of a mineral crystal. They have locked together laterally, covering the surface like a microscopic mosaic.
Okay, I see the flat sheet. They are anchored to the rock.
Now they undergo what's called vertical seepage. The mineral environment is built in layers, right? Like a stack of microscopic sieves. The parent sheet of molecules is sitting on layer Z. The hydrothermal vent pulses with intense heat, causing the crystal lattice to expand ever so slightly.
Oh, and that forces them down.
Exactly. This thermal cycle, combined with fluid pressure, physically forces the chemical pattern downward into the microscopic pores of the next mineral layer, layer Z+1.
Wow, so the parent sheet acts as a template, printing a daughter copy of itself directly into the rock layer beneath it. That is incredibly alien. The organism is essentially a two-dimensional film, and its method of giving birth is to seep its physical geometry deeper into a porous stone.
Right, because the crystal itself provides the structural scaffolding that early life hasn't learned to build for itself yet. The rock is acting as the cell wall, the skeleton, and the memory drive all at once.
Okay, but seeping down into the next layer sounds smooth in theory, but rocks aren't perfectly uniform, right?
Yeah.
What happens when this biological pattern is pushed down into a mineral layer that has a totally different crystal structure? Like if the microscopic grid of the receding layer is tighter or skewed at an angle.
This is where we see a really brilliant mechanical maneuver. The daughter copy often doesn't fit perfectly into the receiving layer's unit cell. So to survive the transfer, it undergoes karyotic compression.
Karyotic compression, meaning it shrinks.
Well, the transfer into the new mineral stage physically strips out high-order anisotropy. Parts of the structural data are literally stripped out to fit.
Here's where it gets really interesting to me. Instead of just a standard digital zip file analogy, let's look at this physically. It's like trying to move a massive, intricately carved oak dining table into a new room, but the doorway is too narrow.
Right, you can't fit the whole thing through.
So you physically remove the legs, you strip away its degrees of freedom, leaving behind the intricate details just so the core structure can squeeze through the narrow opening into the new room.
That is a very apt way to visualize it. The chemical pattern is literally squished. It loses its fine spatial memory to conform to the admissible space of the receiving rock. But a table without legs isn't fully functional, right?
Right. So once it's squeezed into the new crystal layer, this puddle of compressed chemicals has to rebuild itself. But it doesn't have a genetic blueprint to guide it. How does it know how to put the legs back on?
Through environmental re-expansion. The compressed daughter state uses the ambient chaos of the vent as its tools. A sudden pulse of ultraviolet light from the surface, a rapid shift in salinity, or a localized electrical gradient provides a sudden spike of energy.
And that energy builds it back up.
It acts like a hammer, snapping chemical bonds back into place. But here's the critical part. Those new bonds are now guided by the geometric constraints of the new crystal room they are sitting in. The environment physically forces the structure to rebuild itself.
So the environment isn't just a passive backdrop. It's supplying the raw mechanical power to unzip and decompress the organism. And because the new room has a slightly different shape, when the table gets put back together, it might not look exactly like the parent.
Which brings us to the earliest mechanism of evolution, Topological protomutation.
Proton mutation, so mutating before genetics.
Exactly. We don't have sequences of genetic letters mutating yet. What mutates is the geometry. Errors in this violent compression and re-expansion process result in physical shape deformations, a slight twist in how a carbon ring sits, a mismatched bilayer, a flip in the structure.
Inheritable variance driven entirely by geometry, not sequence. So if the reconstructed molecule has a slightly different fold, and that new fold happens to capture geothermal heat better, it has an energy advantage.
Right. That new mutated shape is what will successfully seep down into the next layer.
Yeah.
Survival of the geometrically fittest, playing out deep inside the pores of a stone. Evolution was mapping out a vast search space of geometric shapes long before it invented the genetic alphabet.
Okay, we have this mesmerizing picture of pregenetic life. It's computing its next move, it's squeezing through narrow crystalline doors, it's mutating its physical shape, but it's entirely tethered to the rock. But look at us today. Look at your own hands as you listen to this. We are biological machines moving freely. We aren't stuck to rocks. How did life break free? How does a 2D sheet become a mobile 3D cell?
That transition is described mathematically as W-sheaf gluing. And while the mathematics in the sources are extremely dense, the physical reality is awe-inspiring. Think of a sheaf here as a way to track data across different physical spaces.
Okay.
On the surface of the crystal, you have multiple isolated patches of these chemical computations happening simultaneously, little islands of biological form and weight.
And they are all hitting their full complements independently.
Over time, these patches grow. They spread across the mineral face until their boundaries begin to touch. Sheaf gluing is the exact mathematical climax when the boundary persistence, the metabolic throughput, and the reproduction rates of all these local patches simultaneously exceed a critical threshold.
Like isolated musicians in a room suddenly finding the exact same rhythm, syncing up, and instantly becoming an orchestra.
Yes. The local compatible sections physically and mathematically fuse into a coherent global protocellular whole. The sources predict this happens in sudden, threshold-like bursts of complexity, not a smooth, linear buildup. Just as water reaches a specific temperature and instantly crystallizes into ice, these isolated chemical sheets hit a threshold and instantly snap into a unified system.
And as this massive synchronization happens, the system needs to protect itself, right? It forms an amphiphilic envelope, like a primitive lipid bilayer. It folds up, creating a 3D pouch to close itself off from the seepage. But this is the moment that completely blew my mind in the reading. It doesn't just detach and float away into the ocean.
Right, because if we connect this to the bigger picture, if it simply detached and floated away, it would be fatal. It would leave behind the mineral scaffolding that serves as its structural memory and its computational hardware.
It would be like a software program trying to run without a motherboard.
Exactly. So, to achieve true mineral independence, it swallows the rock.
Mineral internalization.
Yes. As the lipid pouch folds upward and begins to close, an acquisition gate remains momentarily open. The physical membrane tears away from the surface, and in doing so, it absorbs tiny crystalline platelets, local metal ions, and actual physical chunks of the rock's microscopic defects directly into its belly. It seals them inside.
It takes its house with it. It literally eats the physical stone and uses it as an internal skeleton.
Think about the implications for modern cellular biology. These swallowed pieces of periodic mineral, these internal crystalline lock sites, they eventually become the first proto-organelles. Even today, our cells are not just bags of water. They are highly structured, featuring internal cytoskeletons and intricate scaffolding. The protocell didn't magically invent its internal architecture from scratch out in the open ocean. It internalized the crystal lattice. It brought the computing rock inside itself. Life took its birthplace with it.
That is staggering. We always talk about life adapting to its environment, but at the very dawn of existence, life physically ingested its environment and repurposed it as mobile hardware. By taking the crystal structure inside the pouch, the cell could now execute its geometric computations anywhere. It became a self-contained mobile computation engine.
It replaced the external geological stage with an internal biological one.
Let's just take a breath and look at the sheer scale of the journey we just took. We started with the old, tired narrative of a random soup hoping to win the cosmic lottery.
And we systematically replaced it with a rigorous Gibsonian framework of discrete physics. Computing rocks.
Right. We saw how the full complement rule demanded exact conditions acting as strict logical gates. We visualized two-dimensional sheets of molecules seeping downward through porous stones, zipping themselves up to squeeze through tight doorways, and using the chaotic energy of the environment to rebuild themselves.
We observed topological proton mutation, where the geometry drove evolution long before DNA.
And finally, that breathtaking phase transition, the synchronization of chemical islands into a single system that folds up, swallows a chunk of the crystal to use as an internal hard drive, and breaks free into the ocean.
It really requires a profound shift in how we perceive the boundaries between geology and biology.
Which brings us back to you, the listener. Think about the next time you hold a common stone in your hand, or look closely at the quartz in your watch. This framework fundamentally changes how you should look at that object. It's not just dead, inert matter. Under the right conditions, with the right thermal forces pulsing through it, that rigid structure is the original motherboard. It is the exact computational hardware that processed the software of life. So what does this all mean for you?
Well, the rock is the first active participant in our biological lineage.
And that leaves me with one final, lingering thought to explore. If life is not a freak accident, if it is a strict mathematically lawful consequence of discrete token physics on mineral lattices, well, since the universe is absolutely littered with these exact same periodic minerals, hydrothermal vents, and thermal forces, does this full complement rule imply that the entire cosmos is basically a decentralized infinite computation engine? Is the universe just inevitably waiting to boot up life absolutely everywhere?